Hey guys, welcome back. So today we are going to be talking about my Creality CR-10s5 3D printer. Now, as you may be able to see, this thing is pretty gigantic, and that is extremely handy. Now, up until the last 2 weeks, I haven't really used this printer to its full potential. So once I started the Boba Fett project that I showed in my last video, I started printing larger pieces. Everything I'd done before that was, I did a couple of okay sized things, like I did a helmet display stand from Sean Fields, which I'm gonna do a whole video on these soon. But that was the largest thing prior to the Boba Fett build, and that barely made a dent on this printer area, this print area. So I felt like it wasn't really enough to, give a proper review. So now that I've printed a whole bunch of big stuff, I feel like I can go over the ins and outs of this printer. And overall, it's been really, really good. I would definitely recommend this printer. So as you can see here, I have a Boba Fett torso, which I showed in my previous video. The reason this is up here is because to date, this is the largest print that I've ever done in any means, hired out or anything, in one piece. So even though it's two colors, this is a one-piece print. I just ran out of filament halfway through, but you can see it's how deep it is and how the height and the width and everything is. It's a big print. Now, this print only took 62 hours, and I ran the machine at like 70 to 75% speed the whole time, which I'll get into that in a minute. But that is less than 3 days to print something this large is pretty amazing, I think. It wouldn't be possible to print this whole thing at that speed without the one modification that I've done to this printer, which is to swap the nozzle. The extruder nozzle that it comes with is a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, which is pretty standard on most 3D printers. Most FDM printers have a 0.4 millimeter nozzle as a default. Not all, but most. Same with this one, but that's just takes way too long. So by switching to a 0.8 millimeter nozzle, I also have a 1 millimeter nozzle, haven't tried that yet, but by switching to a 0.8 millimeter nozzle, it cuts your print time down considerably, more than half, because now you can print higher layer heights at the same time. So if you have a big print like this, where you have areas where, a giant layer doesn't matter, you can print big layer heights, like, a 0.4 millimeter layer height, which is pretty tall. And it also uses less passes to make the same wall thickness. So if I'm doing a 1.6 millimeter wall thickness on the part, which is a pretty good thickness for something like this, that would take 4 passes with the previous nozzle. Whereas with this nozzle, it only takes 2. So you have 2 passes. So even if I'm printing at the same layer height, it's taking half the time just at the same layer height. So you're cutting the print times down by almost 75% by swapping to a nozzle like this, which, again, on a printer this big, that makes a lot of sense. If this is your only printer, that's a decision you have to make, because you do lose a little bit of detail on some of the corners and so forth, but not that much. If you have other printers like I do, I'm trying to set them up for different situations. So anyway, I'll stop rambling about that. But that is the only thing I've changed on this printer, is that nozzle. Everybody told me, like, oh, you're going to need to get a volcano extruder, you're going to need all this stuff. You don't need any of that stuff. Just swap the nozzle, turn the temperature up a little bit more than you would for some other filaments, and you will be fine. This thing is printed for weeks now, basically non-stop, and I've printed, stuff this tall, the rocket for Boba Fett's pack, and a full helmet. One shot, full helmet. Which, again, really good thing about having a printer that can print stuff that's big is you can do this in one piece. You don't have to do any assembly. Now, is there going to be cleanup? Yeah, but I'm not worried about that. Anyway, so let me get this out of the way so we can take a proper look here as I break everything. So that's the great stuff about it. It's being able to print huge things. It's fantastic. Also, as you saw on that previous piece, there's a part where the filament ran out and had to swap. The filament switch on this, it's really basic, but it does a very good job of stopping and picking back up where it left off. So if you run out of filament, especially on a big print where you can't watch it for days and days, if it runs out of filament, it will stop, and when you put the new filament in, it does pick back up right where it left off, which always makes me nervous. I'm always concerned it's going to be offset or anything, but I've had to do it on just about every one of my prints here, and they've all worked perfectly. So that is a giant plus. But the switch is really basic. It's literally just a switch. So if the filament runs out, it'll stop. But if the filament breaks here or starts to grind out for some reason, it won't pick that up. If there's filament in the switch and something goes wrong somewhere else, there's a clog, it'll keep running. But I've only had 2 prints go bad because of that, and I'll get into those in a moment when I talk about the bad stuff. It's not even a bad thing. Those were actually, I think, a problem with the G-code, so ignore that last comment. But yeah, the switch is it's a physical switch. It's not like the Prusa back here has basically like a laser mouse like you use for a computer, so it can actually sense whether the filament is moving. So if there's a clog in the Prusa, whether the filament runs out or not, it will stop the printer, which is really, really nice. And this doesn't have that, but just know that the switch works well. So I'll stop on that one now. Then it's been really, really reliable. That's the next part. Not that I've used it for forever, but for the amount of printing I've done in the last 2 weeks, I haven't had anything go wrong with the printer. It hasn't done anything bizarre or have a freak out that, is upsetting or makes me question it. It's been working really well. I feel like I'm starting to really trust it, which is good. That's a big thing for me, especially on something that prints stuff this large. You don't want to leave the house and worry whether you're going to come home and it's going to be all jacked up. So let's see, some other stuff. Notes, I should say. When I got the printer, it came with this adhesion pad sticky thing, which was good while it lasted, but it wore out sort of quick. So I started using glue. I went into a whole video on this too. Now I've switched to this Loctite spray adhesive for my bed surface. It's worked great. I haven't had any problems with adhesion at all since using this, so that's good. One thing I would recommend is running the bed temperature slightly lower. Like I've been printing PLA. A lot of people print PLA at like 60-degree bed temperature. I'm doing it at 30 because what happens is if it times out and the filaments, if it stops because of the filament running out, it goes into pause, but it doesn't keep the heat on for the heat bed. So your print bed will contract and expand and contract due to the temperature. And if it contracts too much, your part is going to come undone. So if you're going from 60 degrees down to like 20 degrees or whatever the ambient temperature of the room is, the part could just pop loose just because of that. So you don't want to pause your print and have the part break loose. And printing at 30 with PLA is totally fine. Works great. So let's see, I made some little notes here too. Overall, the other things that get into like the bad stuff, which this is being nitpicky and I'm just covering these things just so you know things I've run into. The printer, when it's off, if you push the sides here up or down, it will actually move a little bit. So you have to be careful if you're changing your filament. If you're putting too much pressure here, it will move unless the printer is on and you have it paused or something, then it won't move anywhere. But if you have it just off, you can actually move this rod a little bit and then the printer will be misaligned when you go to start printing again. It's very easy to fix. Like you can literally just do it by hand, bring the little gantry all the way down to the bed and check it, and it's usually pretty easy to fix. But just a thing to note. Now that I know that it does that, I'm just careful not to like push on the bar at all when I'm messing with the printer, and it's been fine. I've been able to just hit start and the prints start up just fine. No adjustments to make in between prints. I will still check when I start the print to make sure that it's adhering to the bed properly. Sometimes it just needs a little tweak here and there, but it's been really good about that. Let's see. It's a bit noisy, but it's a big printer. So when it again, I'm gonna stand back next to this thing so you can see the scale. But the vertical rods that are back here, it's not gonna do it because this is too high up. But when this the horizontal, the x-axis is down lower, the threaded rods shake a little bit and they rattle at the top of the printer, and it makes some noise. I might put some foam in there, or maybe like just something to kind of buffer that a little bit. So a little noisy, especially compared to like the Prusa, which is dead quiet. A little bit noisy, not terrible. And because it's so big, and it's a Cartesian style printer, which means that the bed goes back and forth, when you get into really small movements, the thing shakes a lot. And this, even with just barely a print on here, just the weight of the bed with the glass can cause like a lot of shaking of the whole table. So, you know, there's probably a way to remedy that. Maybe like some softer rubber feet, or some like a little foam pads under the feet or something to kind of like just calm the shakedown of the whole area. But the printer does move a lot, and there's a lot of momentum. So you get into the problem that when you have a really big print that's going to take up a big chunk of the bed, if it's doing fill on the top and the printer's going back and forth really fast, there's a lot of mass to deal with because it's moving the entire model, the entire print bed. It gets pretty crazy, which is why I end up turning the speed down, which I mentioned earlier. I'll put the speed from, like I started at 100 when I'm at the low end of the thing and I'm just getting the basic layers. I'll run it at 100%. But as soon as it starts to get a little bit higher, I start slowly dialing it down. As it gets tall like this, I'll turn this down to like 60%, maybe even 50. It's just so that if it's doing fill at the top and the print bed is moving back and forth, it's not going to knock the print off of the printer. So for something like this, it's really like a pretty tall print. You know, you see this on the print bed, it doesn't have much of a base to grip onto, and it's pretty tall. If that print bed's moving back and forth really quick, it's going to shake it off of the print bed. So that is a drawback to this printer design in general, which almost all my printers work like this, but it's a drawback to not having the bed actually rise in vertical space. That's much better print design, but it's a lot more expensive. So anyways, just a thing to consider. However, just remember that even when this printer's turned down to like 50%, 60%, it's still printing faster than it would if I used a different nozzle. Because of the 0.8mm nozzle, it's still printing faster than it would be if I was using a 0.4mm nozzle. Keep that in mind. So I don't mind turning it down a little bit if it's starting to get tall. That's a thing to consider. Let's see here. I'm also thinking about if there's a way to take this glass off and swap this for another material. Like the Prusa has a sheet metal bed that's flexible, and I'm really curious whether I can't come up with something like that for this printer that's a lot lighter and removable, because that would be nice just to be able to just pop it off and then take your print off without having to like dig in there and scrape. So I might try to custom make something like that and see if it works. If it does, you know, I'll teach you guys how to do it. I don't know. It's something I'm thinking about. Because yeah, there's just the piece of glass on here with no print weighs enough that it makes everything shake. So yeah, shaking, a little bit noisy, but again, the prints have come out pretty nice and it's been reliable. I mean, I've got like full giant pieces here. It worked well. Let's see what else I put on here. Sorry. Oh, the access to the adjustments for the bed are like way underneath here, which isn't too bad on the front, but on the back, to get around to the back of the printer and adjust the bed is kind of a pain. Like I said before, it's been pretty consistent now that I've got it set up and it's been running a lot. It's been really consistent. I haven't had to do bed adjustments except for a minor little twist here, but nothing big. So that's not a big deal. But when you're setting it up and you're trying to get everything right and just reach around the back of the thing and try to level the bed is kind of a pain. There's that. They make some for the regular CR10. They make these knob adapters that make it a lot easier to reach, but it does not work on this printer because the Y-axis guide rods here are too close to the adjustments. So anyway, that's a gripe. It's not really a big deal. Let's see. What is the next one? The Bowden Tube, right here. This might be it's not my biggest gripe. It's kind of like the thing you have to pay attention to the most. This tube, the Bowden tube that runs the filament, is very long. So if the print goes back really far, this can catch on the print, which is not good because it can knock the print down, which is I had happen one time. It can just snag in weird ways and cause issues that are bad. So what I end up doing is taking a coat hanger. I'll get this out of the way. I take a coat hanger and then like a lanyard. Looks really pretty, right? And I basically hang it up here and then just use this to lift the Bowden tube up out of the way. And then I'll just have to adjust it every few hours. I'll come in and check it and then I'll just, give it some more tension. But focus, camera, there we go. But that's kind of a drawback. Not bad. Let's see. Do I have anything else on here? Bowden tube too long. Hard to adjust. Yeah, so I mean that's pretty much it. Those are kind of my only my only gripe so far. Everything works really well. There's a couple things in the menus on the printer that are sort of strange. Like there's a menu for control, and it's instead of giving you options to the axes to control the motors, where the printer position is, that is in the prepare menu. It's not a big deal, but it's just sort of dumb. And again, when it pauses a print, I wish that it would leave the bed heated so that I wouldn't have to worry about the pieces popping loose. Now I haven't had that happen yet, but it definitely could happen. So those are kind of my only complaints so far. Overall, it's worked really well. I've made a whole bunch of nice size prints off of it. We'll see in 5 months if it's still doing a good job, but very happy with it so far. If I was recommending a printer like this to somebody, like if I was going, hey, get this giant printer in your house, I would definitely say get one. If you're going to print big stuff, it's great. If it's your only printer, you may want to keep all the nozzles handy, and don't be scared to swap the nozzles on the printer. It's not that hard to do. So if it's your only printer and you need to print small stuff, you can use the smaller nozzle, obviously. But it goes back to the whole thing is that if you're printing small stuff, but you're running this big printer, you run into those same issues with just running it at full speed and the shaking. Whereas if I print it on my Prusa, I get a really, really clean print. If it's something smaller, it comes out really nice, and it runs way faster than I can run this one. So yeah, there's a trade-off there. For something that's big, obviously I can't do it on my other printers. Anyway, I'll stop rambling here, and we'll look at all the goodies here. Kenner Blaster. But yeah, I would recommend it. It's good. Anyway, thanks guys for stopping by. I'm going to just upload this in one take, so I apologize for any excess rambling that you may have heard. If you have questions on the Creality CR-10s5 3D printer, let me know. I'll try to answer them below if there's anything I didn't talk about. But again, overall, I totally recommend this printer. It's been really good for the time that I've used it. So I will be back again soon with some more stuff on this Boba Fett process as I get to it. Anyway, I'll stop rambling. Jeez, I'm getting out of here. Later, guys. Bye.